Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area. All right, welcome everyone back to another show. I'm Dr. Long.
I'm Lawyer Nik. Today, Long, I want to talk to you about medical doctor agreements. Basically, when you're looking at an employment agreement in the medical field, specifically as they relate to doctors. I've never read one. You sent me over a template of one you've seen before, and this is extremely interesting. I have a lot of questions, but to start, is the employment agreement for doctors, is that like the standard within the medical field?
Yes, no matter what kind of physician you are or doctor, you are required to sign a contract. It varies in terms of how long the contract is. Obviously, the pay changes, but some of the nuances are all still there. Like the components of what the contract shows are going to be quite similar across the nation, no matter which employer. Because obviously, the contract probably benefits the employer more than the actual employee.
Now, is that because there are, when you go outside the medical field, there are a lot of companies that don't necessarily formalize employment within contracts, right? And there's also laws that govern, whether maybe a state is an at-will state where you can fire or leave somebody at will, terminate employment at will. So is the employment agreement, obviously the profession of being a doctor is a super important profession. But is it more so standard just because of the importance, or is it standard based on some sort of legal requirement for doctors, or maybe a requirement from what's the equivalent of like your bar association or your state bar? Like your
So we have a medical association, so it's called the AMA.
so or is it a requirement of the AMA then?
Honestly, I don't know the background or the reason this all came about, but I do understand that because, obviously we deal with patient lives and patient care and health, that you can't abruptly lose a physician.
Yeah.
And then that really not only screws the company, the employer, but it also screws the patient. And so I think this does legally protect the employer, but also it protects the patient. And then of course there is a small component that does protect the actual employee,
Yeah.
the physician himself. And yes, as we discuss through the contract, you'll kind of see where it's kind of beneficial depending on your perspective on your situation.
Yeah, yeah. And it's super interesting because, one of the things about this podcast is that we try to be super transparent and try to really, explain to the audience what we see and what we've gone through. I thought I was amazing at contract law in law school. I think
Mhm.
I thought I got an A on that final exam. I think I got like a C or a C plus. It was shocking.
Yeah.
Maybe I got a B minus, but contract law, a lot of it comes from a place of common sense, right? You want to make sure that you're finalizing exactly what you want, exactly what the other side wants, but there's always the back and forth and the negotiation of the contract.
Yeah.
And the way that you write it in the legal sense of it, when you're writing a legal document, if I'm writing on behalf of my client, I want to make sure I'm getting the power from my client. I want to make sure I'm putting in the legalese that protects my client more than it protects the other side.
Hmm.
And what I was reading, any employment contract, you are, I imagine a young doctor coming in for their first, stint at being a doctor, their first employment agreement, and you have this massive, hospital community that's worth billions of dollars saying, well, if you want to work here, here are the terms that you have to agree to. So
Hmm.
did you get that feeling the first time you signed on to a medical agreement, or I guess an employment agreement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You hit it, right in the head of the nail there. It's coming out of residency, you're a brand new doctor. You're just excited to get an interview. You're just excited to get a job. There are now more people advocating for people to get lawyers right on that first contract. But sometimes coming out of residency, you have no money to afford a lawyer.
Yeah.
And it's not cheap. You guys aren't cheap at all. And so the first contract I did sign, I did not use a lawyer, which I do feel it was due to my detriment. I did, however, have my attending. So my all the docs that I worked under, I gave a contract for each of them to review. But again, they're doctors, they're not lawyers. So they
Yeah.
could pinpoint certain things. But the consensus was, oh, everything looked good. Obviously, the sign-on bonus was good. The salary looked good, but they couldn't give me the nitty-gritty of things that I found out once I started employment. I should have had this in the contract. I should have tweaked this in the contract. So actually, with the second job that I got in the last year, I did get a lawyer. I paid a hefty price for it, but
Mhm.
it was nice to have someone in my corner. But the funny thing is, I actually did enough research on it on my own over the last several years that I knew what to ask for. I knew what to negotiate for. So I really didn't use a lawyer much. It was
Yeah.
more just for him to be there in case I needed him. And I,
Mhm.
I do feel like it was well worth it. And so I always advocate new residents, any new doctor getting a new contract, you should always have a lawyer review the contract, just like we're doing now.
And I think that that's one of the unique things about contracts, a contract law is that, there is a right to contract. There is a right for an individual to enter into an agreement with another individual or entity. And you always have the ability, maybe, not financially, but you always have the ability to take it to a lawyer. And I would say this, I know we're not giving medical advice and legal advice, but I would always recommend that if you're ever about to enter into a contract with somebody and you say, I'm going to take this to my lawyer, and they put some pause on it and they say, well, you don't need to take it to your lawyer. You don't need to do that. Then that's probably a reason to take it to your lawyer,
Right.
because then something is probably in there that's at your own peril, at your own detriment, and you want to be able to look at it. So I
And
think that,
actually, just to cut you off, I mean, that is a common thing amongst bigger health systems, right? What they're going to
yeah.
say is, this is the contract, and we don't make adjustments or changes for anyone. This is the standard contract for every physician that we hire on.
Mhm.
They say that, but it's usually not the case.
That was going to actually be my question is
Mhm.
how did you leverage, I guess, because every contract, from my opinion, when you enter into a discussion about a contract, you are entering into a negotiation. You are negotiating over the terms of that contract. So how did you negotiate with a bigger, stronger health system? How did you not get railroaded and told, nope, this is our contract, take it or leave it?
Right. Yeah. And so this is where experience, right? Years in the field, working as a physician, getting that under my belt is where it allowed me to sell myself, advertise
Yeah.
myself. So I'm coming to this new organization. I've now had 4 years under my belt. I have the data of how well my patients were doing at this previous job, and I could show them those numbers. But then also professionally, I can speak
Yeah.
more confidently. But the other half of it is financially. So if you are bogged down with a whole bunch of student debt, you're already going to go into the negotiations the underdog, because the system knows that you are tied to this job once you have it, because you're paying down student debt.
Yeah.
So I was able to pay down my student debt very quickly. So when I got my second job, they could not use that against me. They couldn't, hang this carrot in front of me and say, hey, you know, we will give you this money if you stick with us
Yeah.
so that we pay off your student debt. I didn't allow them. I said that, guess what? I have no student debt. So you have to make what's the phrase, like you have to make the pot sweeter or something,
Yeah.
pot sweeter for me to join you, because
Hmm.
I'm actually, you need me more than I need you at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
There are so many other jobs, there are so many other employers within the area that I could apply and work for. You need to make your deal sweeter. And
And
so
that,
that comes with experience, but
yeah.
more importantly, I think that comes with being student debt free, which is very hard to do as a physician. I mean, to be most people. I mean, now when you go to undergrad, when you go to graduate school, we rack in so much student debt that it's hard to get out of
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. And that's, again, bringing the medical and the legal together. That is something that I have been in negotiation positions where I could not walk away based on, when I was doing a stint in aerospace and defense. You have those agreements. You cannot walk away from those agreements. You and the supplier just need to find a way to make it work. The ability to walk away from a negotiation is such a strong leverage point. And when you have the situation to where you can look at a contract and you say, "Nope, I'm sorry, I'm leaving," that's super beneficial. I actually did it this past week. I know that we've talked about, my career now into real estate investing, and I had a contract, or a house I wanted to put on contract. We actually signed the contract. Something occurred, so we did an addendum to the contract, and the realtor, sent me over additional terms that I wasn't okay with. And even though we had signed the original contract, I was like, well, this is going to be the addendum. If we're going to move forward with this, I hadn't paid any earnest money, so I hadn't put my consideration up. And at that point, I just said, you know what? I'm out. I'm backing out. And she said, all right, thank you. And I moved on with my life because I had the ability to walk away. So it sounds like you being secure in your profession, secure in your career at that point, you had the ability to walk away and you had worth, you had value. What I do find interesting though is the discussion point on your student loans. Is that something you have to reveal to them, or do they ask that question, or can it be completely private?
It can be completely private, but that is the point of a sign-on bonus or incentives, right? So certain employers will highlight those loan forgiveness programs that they offer as a way
Okay.
to entice physicians to come work for them. We will
Okay.
give
Yeah.
you this certain amount over a certain amount of years if you stick with us, or we will give you this big sign-on bonus to pay off whatever you want to do with it if you come work for us. And so
Yeah.
those are their selling points. But if those things I don't need it, then I need them to do something else to offset. Like if I'm not utilizing the sign-on bonus, then maybe you increase my salary, or
Yeah.
maybe you allow me to work less. So that again, you just have a little bit more power in that dynamic when you are not bogged down, like you said, with
Yeah.
those other things.
And there is some strategy to that too. Again, pulling from my own experience, when you're negotiating sign-on bonuses and you're negotiating salary, you
Hmm.
also, a smart individual may want to take back and pull out the old Excel file and look at, well, if I have a sign-on bonus of this much, then maybe that will impact taxes. Or maybe that's immediate money that I can pay off debt. Or, hey, I'm going to forego the sign-on bonus because if I add that to my salary when I get a raise next year, the compounding of my salary will be a lot more beneficial than taking a signing bonus right now.
You
So,
got it.
no.
You got it. Those are exactly the things that I thought about. Because my first job, I had a really big sign-on bonus because it was a rural
Mhm.
position. But I also knew that that first year, half of the year was on my resident salary, which is like pennies, compared to what an attending makes. And so I took that huge sign-on bonus initially and took the tax hit. But
Mhm.
then because I left that job early, you have to pay back a prorated amount.
Okay.
And so what I leveraged is I used the new job and I said, hey, you want me to come work for you, but I have to leave this other job. So if you will pay them out, I will come work for you.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was going through the contract you sent me, I noticed that where it has a lot of points, and we'll get into the terms of the contract here in a little bit, but it had a lot of points of, okay, if you have a signing bonus and somehow things get terminated early, here are the ways that you have to pay us back the money or prorate things, and it's always super interesting when you're looking at stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So what was I mean, you get this in the mail or emailed to you or handed to you. You're looking through all of it. And from a lawyer perspective, even though I've never really read a medical contract and employment agreement, there are things that stand out. There are things where I can say, "Oh yeah, that's pretty standard," or "Hey, it's missing something. Here's what it's missing." So you get it, you're overwhelmed, but you're reading through it. Was there safety in knowing that, okay, all these other doctors in this huge medical system have also signed the same agreement? So if they're all signing the same agreement, it's got to be okay.
Yes and no, only because we're all signing the same agreements, but they're all slightly different. And that's where I wish I knew where they had more transparency. Like I
Yeah.
want to know the same doc that's been here 2 to 3 years, like did they sign on the same salary as me? Do they have the same bonus as me? How about the female to male? Like, did the
Hmm.
female physician get a little less? Did the male get a little bit more? Like, I wish there was a little bit more nuance and transparency in that, but we don't, unfortunately. And so, yes, in terms of like just the general contract, I know it's common across the country that we all are eventually going to have to sign a contract to work. So
Yeah.
it's just whether or not those details I am okay with.
Yeah. Okay. And who is the person on the other side? Is it an HR representative? Is it another doctor?
Nope. On the other side is an HR administrator, way above our pay grade, that comes down and says, "Hey, this is it, and we will make these concessions." And
And I'm assuming the HR administrator probably doesn't have any medical experience, or at least they're not.
no, they are not usually. I would say I have not yet met one, but they are usually not a physician turned administrator. They are
Okay.
usually some sort of negotiator, lawyer. Like they have this background, and this is what
Mhm.
they went into. This was their career. This is their
Yeah.
choice in career. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I obviously want to go through the contract with you because I have a few questions. We're not going to share the contract on screen because obviously there can be legal issues there, or if we're
Mhm.
sharing the details of a contract,
Right.
regardless of what health system it's with. And I don't know if this was your contract or somebody else's contract, or you pulled it offline, but we don't have to talk about that. But
Right.
it seems like based on our discussion, what's in this contract are some of the standard items of what's in a medical contract for legal employment for medical employment. So my first question is you're signing a contract. Usually the employment agreement dictates what you're going to be doing and for how long. So I want to position on the how long. What are the terms like for
So the
length?
how long is very open-ended. So most contracts have what we call a guaranteed period. So you get
Okay.
a salary paid no matter how many patients you see for usually the first 12 to 24 months,
Yeah.
especially as a family physician, because when you start out at a new job, you're not patients don't magically just show up, right? You have to advertise yourself, you have to get your name out there, and then you have to build your panel, is what we call it. You have to build your patient panel,
Yeah.
so that patients keep coming back. They know that they're your doctor or you're their doctor. So to do that, they allow 12 to 24 months to do so. And so within that contract, that is usually the biggest thing that you want to look for is, do you get 1 year or do you get 2 years of this guaranteed salary? After that, I think it leaves it very open ended. There is no renewal of contract. You don't have to re sign a contract unless something changes. And
Hmm.
so, my last job, I signed the contract. I never had to re sign a contract unless we made minor changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would minor changes be considered anything to your salary though?
No. So that's the thing with the medical contract is that initial 2 years, it's based on salary. So no matter how many patients you see, but
Yeah.
after those 2 years, you are now paid by per patient. So what are you doing for the patient? How many patients are you seeing? And that is then your salary. So if you're seeing 2 patients a day, your salary is going to reflect that. Your income is going to reflect that. If you're seeing 50 patients a day, it's going to reflect that. So there's a very fine balance between good medicine and good income.
Okay, so now, I mean, getting into, I'm going to ask
Oh
some
yeah, no,
running
this
questions.
is why I think this is such a good topic because I think a lot of people don't understand the pressures of balancing that because
Mhm.
obviously physicians, we have a lot of student debt, we have to pay that off, we have families that we have to take care of, but we also want to do right by the patient. But employers and the system and the health system has set up it this way.
Yeah, yeah. So in law, right,
Mhm.
there are times in which when you take on a case, if you end up getting a lawyer, there are some lawyers that you don't have to pay anything until you win or until something's, I don't want to say win because it's hard, but like let's just say if you win your lawsuit, right? You
Right.
get into a car accident and you go hire a lawyer and you don't have to pay them anything. Well, it's contingent on them settling the case. Settling is probably the more appropriate term for it. And in the agreement, the lawyer client agreement, it'll lay out, well, if we have to go to trial, we'll take 50% of the settlement. If we have to file, we'll take 40% of the settlement. If we can settle this before, we'll take 30% of the settlement. Right? It makes things easy and it guarantees that your lawyer is going to work hard for you and you're not spending a lot of your own capital to get the lawsuit done. In Texas, and I don't know if this is in any other states, I'm barred in Texas. But for family law matters, you cannot take that approach. There is
Mhm.
an hourly perspective to paying your attorney. And the reason why is because family law is so delicate with divorces and custody, the court system, the legal system, does not want to encourage attorneys to win or lose, right? because they don't want their end salary to be based off of like, well, I took this to court and now I get more money off of it.
Right.
So that kind of, what you just explained brought that to my attention because how do you avoid as a doctor the whole, well, you need to come back and you need to come back, you need to keep coming back. Oh, you got a cold, come on in. If you have something that's so subtle, you need to come on in. Avoid the financial incentive between being a good doctor and, financially or taking advantage of your patients financially. How do you figure that out?
Yeah. So one, we trust me, we do not want to see our patients more than we have to because we are already overburdened with so many patients, right? So the expected panel is about 2,000 to 3,000 patients. That's how much each physician is expected to maintain over their lifespan, their career. And so that's a lot of patients that will come in randomly for acute issues. Many of them will be seen at least once a year. Some of them will be seen twice a year, and then even more will be seen every 3 months to 4 months.
Mhm.
So everyone varies, and so trust me, there is not a need for us to try to have you keep coming back unless the issue is big enough that it needs to be examined. That's truly the only reason. Now there are some physicians out there who are trying to see 50, 60 patients a day, which may not be safe. But if their patient population understands that that is the way their practice works and they're comfortable with that, that's
Mhm.
fine, right? So that's where you have to really meet your physician, get to know them, and kind of understand how the way they practice. Like, so when I was in residency, one of my attendings, he was that guy that saw 50 patients a day, but he had trained his patients so well that when they came in, they were only allowed to talk about one issue and one issue only.
Mhm.
If they wanted to talk about a second issue, they would have to make another appointment.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that was the only way he could see patients in 10, 15 minutes so that he could get 50 patients in a day.
Mhm.
My approach is a little different. When I see you, I want to address 80 to 90%, hopefully 100% of your concerns
Yeah.
in that one visit. And then hopefully I don't have to see you again for another 6, 7 months to a year,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I prefer a healthy panel. Like I want you to feel like you are well taken care of. Because I have a lot of other patients that I also want to see.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to address all of those things all at once. So in a day, I would rather see 18, 20 patients. Um, but it usually averages between 22 to 24 patients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's important. I think a lot of people can relate because when I've gone to the doctor, I've seen many different doctors across many different specialties, and there are some doctors in which you go in and you walk out feeling like you got gypped a little bit. Where you're like, they didn't really listen to me. I don't know if they really got my story. And granted, as the professional on the other side, and with being an attorney, I can relate because we would have clients come in and they might ramble, 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 tell their whole life story. And you're like, I only need like this portion to get
Mm-hmm.
this thing going. And you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
be efficient with your time, but you would go in and you'd feel kind of like, okay, did they really hear me? Did they really understand what I'm going through medically? And then
Yeah.
there's other doctors where I've been with some doctors where all they spend 2 hours with you and you're like, do you not have any other patients? And it's not medical, it's more building rapport or
Mm-hmm.
them just, being on one and being chatty for the day. And then you find that good middle ground of you go in, you build the rapport, but you also feel like walking out like, okay, I trust my doctor. I feel good with our relationship. They really took care of me and they really
Right.
understand what I'm going through. And I feel like their plan moving forward is one that's really tailored to me and what I'm going through as opposed to just like, all right, here, take these pills and get out and go,
Right.
which
Right.
is sometimes the feeling, I think.
Right. Right. And I think that is due to a couple of factors, right? So one, bedside manner. Not all
Yeah.
physicians are created equal. Some of us have better bedside manner. Some of us are just not very good with people, but this
Mhm.
is the profession we chose. The other is administrative burden, right? So the higher ups, there are requirements. Like there are requirements, minimums that we have to meet. They want us because obviously they want to make a profit. So they're expecting each physician, whether you're a surgeon, whether you're a family physician, whether you're a pediatrician, they want you to see a minimum amount of patients. And if you're not, they're gonna be emailing you. They're gonna be talking to you about those things. And then you have to remember that behind the scenes, it's not just seeing patients. There are paperwork that we have to fill out, referrals that we have to send out, lab work that we have to interpret, images that we have to interpret. Sometimes we have to call other specialists to coordinate care. Sometimes we have to do a lot of prior authorizations with insurance, which is a headache. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we have to do. And so unfortunately, if the physician is very burnt out or is not able to time manage, then yes, unfortunately, patients will feel like they're being rushed. But I don't think it's intentionally. I don't think it's malicious.
Mhm.
It's just the way the system has created this just fast go, 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 see the
Yep.
next patient, see the next patient. But it's unfortunate that that's how it turns out and that's how it's perceived. But
Mhm.
I promise you that physicians went into this to help patients, not to make money. Because trust me, there are other careers and fields out there that make way much more without so much investment in their, in their lifespan.
No, that definitely that makes a lot of sense. I think
Yeah.
that helps. And I think one of my questions for a later show will be, what are you guys doing while I'm waiting 45 minutes in the room for you to come in?
Oh yeah, we can get into that. We're back there just having a beer.
Yeah, yeah, being drunk and handling patients, that's probably the way to do it, right? All right, so back to the contract because we kind of went on a segue. So we talked about the term, and I think the one thing that stood out to me was this notion of termination, right? So the ability to voluntarily or involuntarily terminate employment, whether that's on your side or the hospital system side. So again, I feel like contracts are written to leverage a certain party unless you got a good lawyer, unless you've done your due diligence. Within this specific contract that I'm looking at, it looks like there's 90-day voluntary notice where you're trying to give a 90-day notice. So let's stick with voluntary termination. You've decided to move on. What does that look like as far as your contract and your duties?
You are you're doing patient care until the very last day,
Okay.
until that last day. So when you put in your notice, you're giving that 90-day notice. So if it's June now and I'm giving my notice for September
Hmm.
or August, then that's what you tell them. You say, this is the date, this is my last day, and I work up to that point, but you're doing everything that you normally would on a day-to-day basis. You just know there's an end point. But like you said, it truly benefits the employer more because they can fire you or terminate you at will, right? So if
Yeah.
there's something that they dislike, they can make up any particular reason
Mhm.
to say, hey, we're going to let you go. Whereas on the physician side, it's usually you find a new job or you just don't like the job in general. You can't really nitpick like, oh, they did this and that because then you might get sued.
And for most
Defaming it.
people, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just you are fighting against a bigger system that
Yeah.
has a lot more, resources.
So, for most people who don't know, like the term at will, some states have laws in which they implement where it's not an at will state, where there's certain standards you got to meet to hire and fire and so on and so forth. But when you hear the phrase at will, it means you can literally be terminated for any reason. But there's also the notion of, well, in some states, you can leave your job without giving any notice. I know that from a professional standpoint, everybody always says, like, hey, give your 2-week notice. I think at one career I had gotten so fed up with it that it was a like 1 day notice. And another career I had given like a 60-day notice. But when you hear at will, as long as it's not, a discriminatory factor, you're kind of at the beck and call of like the system, right? So if we were to reverse it, what happens if you want to resign your position in 30 days or 60 days?
You
What
have
is
to follow
the
the contract because then otherwise they will pull out the contract and say this is what you signed and they can sue you for it.
and what because I did not see it within the contract that you sent me. And I'm sure some contracts have it and some don't, but I did not see any penalties for it. So what would the damages be under that?
The damages would be the loss in patient income, right? So if you
Okay.
are not seeing patients for a whole month, they could potentially go back and see, okay, you generated this on average per month. They're
Mhm.
going to take that away from your salary or sue you for it.
Gotcha.
But that's why it's very important to get those dates down. So it usually ranges between 30 days to 180 days. So my last contract was 180 days, so
Hmm.
6 months, because it was more rural. So it's harder for
Yep.
them to recruit physicians. So they wanted to know early on. So I gave my 6 month notice at that point. My new contract currently, it's actually only, I think I want to say 45 or 60-day contract.
Hmm.
And the reason that's beneficial for me is because when I'm ready to leave a position, I want to get out of there. I don't want to sit there and deal with administrators or employers, if especially if we're ending not on the greatest terms, right? But the only way that works is, again, leverage, is if you're not tied down because you have family in the area. If you are stuck in the area, or you can't find another employer, or you have a lot of student debt, you can't take a chance to lose income. Like, there are so many reasons why you would want a longer notice, because at least up until that last day you're getting paid no matter what. Yeah.
And there's also, from a negotiation standpoint, there's concerns if you're asking for a shorter notice. Because as an employer, if somebody's coming in saying, "Hey, I need a 15-day notice or a 30-day notice," the concern for that HR representative sitting across from you is, are they going to jump ship? Are they just here temporarily? And then we're going to be left trying to find another physician and putting this same package together 30 days from now? So.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, that's wild. So to go back, you had also mentioned, maybe there's a little bit of shade being thrown at doctors who put in their notice at 90 days, and the hospital system doesn't like that, so they turn around, they find a way to terminate you. So is that a thing to where some
It's a thing.
doctor?
It's not common though,
Yeah,
because I think both parties, when you are trying to terminate the contract, the relationship, everyone wants to end it amicably. You, you
yes, of
know, you
course.
want to, you don't really want to burn bridges. So I think the intention is to kind of break things loose easily and quickly. But there are some times when it gets really contentious, like, you know, did the doctor do something really bad? Were they under review? Was there a lot of patient safety concerns, or was the employer doing some shady stuff? Was there
Hmm.
some insurance fraud? And are they, there's just so many scenarios and so many things surrounding it that could cause it. But it's a rare occurrence, but it can happen. It
Yeah,
does happen.
that's very interesting because I think that's always a concern for anybody, any job in an at-will state is, or at-will position, I should say, because you could also, again, write to contract, right? You could find a way to write that into your contract that is at-will. But just the concern of when you put in your notice, they say, you know what, we don't need you, kick rocks, bye. And impacts you financially, it impacts your family structure, it impacts, your day to day. And so I think you have to navigate that very carefully when you're trying to leave. Even if there is something that's contentious to where you're trying not to burn bridges, but at the same time you wanna stick around for 90 days so you can make sure that you get paid and close things out. And I'm sure there's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure there's also a moral feeling to where you want to leave your patients and those files in a manner that is transferable to the next physician to make sure that your patients are still taken care of, whether they seek you out in your next career or they stay with that system.
Exactly. Yep. And I think that's where, for physicians, I don't think that there are too many that would be willing to leave in like a sudden moment like that. Like, they would always want to make sure that their patients are covered, refills are set in, they're notified, and legally it's required, because otherwise, if the physician just leaves and drops, goes away, it's considered patient abandonment, and the
Really?
patient, and then, yep, and then the patient can
Okay.
come back and sue. There are nuances on that, because technically the patients aren't owned by the physician; the patients are owned by the employer, so the health system.
Mhm.
So as long as the health system has someone to replace, then they should be fine. But like, if you're a private practice and one day you just suddenly close your doors, patients could sue you for that, because you
Yep.
are no longer caring for them. There is a 30-day notice that
Mhm.
is required.
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar to the legal field in which, and I'll need to do more due diligence to bring it forth to the conversation, but there are situations in which you can be disbarred for not representing your client appropriately. If you go radio silent or you don't have certain communications or you don't do anything with their case and their file, it's akin to abandonment in the sense where this client has relied on you for something, their case or their lawsuit, and when you disappear off the face of the earth, it's not good. And so, in the same manner, you have to find replacements, you have to find co-counsels, you have to find other individuals to take on that client's case, or else you can be in a lot of trouble. So, it's a lot of similarities between the two professions.
Right.
But moving forward, we talked about termination, and we talked about a little bit about compensation. I'm interested from a compensation standpoint, other than signing bonuses, are there other areas of compensation contractually where you're getting a bonus because the hospital system did well or because you're being awarded for your own performance? Are those systems in place as well? And are they usually contracted?
Yes. So again, most physicians have that 1 to 2 year grace period where they're getting paid no matter what.
Right.
After that, they're based on what we call working RVUs. So it's how many patients you're seeing, how many procedures you're doing, and then there is a bonus. Usually, it's either a quarterly bonus or an annual bonus that calculates, okay, how well is your patient panel doing? And again, I'm speaking from a family medicine
Yep.
perspective. But I'm sure surgeons and other specialties have similar contracts. I just don't know the details of how they get paid out in bonus.
Yeah.
But for family physicians, if my patient panel, 80% of the diabetics are well controlled, meaning their
Mhm.
numbers are where they're supposed to be, I might get an incentive for that. Or 80% of the patients who have high blood pressure, their blood pressure is well controlled. I may get a bonus for that. It's a very small percentage, though. It's usually about 5 to 10% of your total salary. So it's not insignificant, but it's not crazy big either.
Yeah.
And it's not only tied into your own patient panel, but it's usually department wide. So there is maybe like 2 to 5% of that bonus may be an overall department. So you want to make sure that you incentivize everyone to do well, right? You want to make sure that no matter who this patient sees, is Dr. Long or are they seeing one of his partners, that we all are focusing on making sure the patient is healthy overall, they're on the right medications, so that we can hit these metrics at the end of the year.
And is your team, like if you're out and let's say you have a physician's assistant, do those metrics apply to you as well or to the PA?
So that is a little bit more nuanced because it's state dependent.
Okay.
And it's physician dependent. So I do not work with any physician assistants or nurse practitioners. Like I personally do not have one that is supervised.
Mhm.
Some states require supervision, some do not. And so the ones that do not and those mid levels work on their own, they have independent panels and they essentially work as as a doctor and
Mhm.
they're seeing their own patients and they have their own metrics that they have to meet. But there are some systems that they actually work under the physician, then yes, the physician will then pull those metrics and get it added to their bonus.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
super, super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And the metrics range, right? So diabetes and blood pressure, those are common things, simple things. But other things that you would want patients to do well on are like cancer screening. Like
Mhm.
how many of them have gotten their colon cancer screening, colonoscopies? How many have done their mammograms? How many have done their PAPs? Those are all incentives that systems will push forward for physicians to encourage their patients to get done. But it's yes, it encourages us to push it because we get a bonus, but it's also beneficial to the patient to get them done, right? Where you want to get screened early.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like pulling teeth because some patients don't want to know they get cancer. And so
Yeah.
the doctor just has to take the ding for that. Some patients don't want to get vaccinated and some places will maybe incentivize, certain vaccinations potentially. I don't think that that is a common thing, but because it's so controversial,
Yeah.
but the cancer screenings, the blood pressure, the diabetes, those are all common things that you would expect a physician to do anyways.
Now, and this might be going a little down the rabbit hole, is this in a way related to the healthcare system as well as insurance within the healthcare system, where we're trying to be more preventative to items as opposed to spending money and money and money on surgeries post, you know?
Yeah. That's hard because I feel like I'm in the trenches and I feel like insurances are working against us
Yep.
because they deny a lot of the medications and recommendations that physicians give. And they always have their own recommendations. Well, then why do we have physicians if you already have this laid out set of rules that you want the patients to jump through first? If someone has a back pain, I know physical therapy isn't going to help because I think that there is a nerve impingement. Let's
Yeah.
just get the MRI. Insurance is going to say no, no MRI. You got to spend 4 to 6 weeks doing physical therapy first, trying some medications before you can get the MRI. Like, why are we wasting that time, that resource,
Yeah.
when the physician has already evaluated and determined that there likely is something more going on? So it's not necessarily preventative. I think it's trying to save money on the insurance's part.
Hmm.
But again, we're working in the system that is so scattered and broken that we try to do the best that we can.
Yeah, I can relate to that physical therapy one because I had a back issue and I went to go see a pain specialist, right? And I told him, hey, I don't necessarily want to have to take pain pills for the rest of my life. So he said, okay, perfect, go to physical therapy. Well, I went to physical therapy, insurance was, covering it. And I ended up not going for, I think, 2 months. And so by the time I went back to physical therapy, the insurance said, nope, you cannot go back until you go back and see your doctor to
Mm-hmm.
get another referral to the physical therapist.
Yeah.
And so when I called in, initially they said, well, just come back in. I was like, physical therapy's working. You've already prescribed it once for me. Can you just write the referral? And then, to some extent, I was like pulling teeth to try to like get that process in order for something that had been working and solving the problem. So I
Mm-hmm.
can definitely relate to that
Yeah.
example you used. But um, to keep it going, another thing that kind of stood out in this contract, and this is very unique. I've never seen this in an employment contract. But then again, the importance of being a doctor, right? So expenses, and I'll read this. In relation to doctor's employment hereunder, the corporation shall provide doctor the office space, furniture, medical equipment, facilities, and support personnel as he or she may reasonably require to fulfill his or her responsibilities hereunder. So, are they just giving you stuff to do your job? How does that work? What does that mean as far as what they provide the doctors?
Yes. Well, like obviously, I bring the skill set, I bring the knowledge from medical school and residency to
Mhm.
do my job, but I need the equipment, right? I need surgical scalpels, I need my otoscopes, I need the lights to be on when I get to work. I need a MA or a nurse to help me with calls, triages, rooming the patients. Otherwise, if that's not in the contract, an employer may say, hey, you know what? You get to room your own patient, you get to do their vitals, their blood pressure, and then you get to check them out, all done by just you, the physician. And we
Yeah.
are already burdened by all this other paperwork, all the documentation, that there's just not enough time to do all of that at once.
Hmm.
Obviously, private doctors are more likely to do that because they're trying to cut costs, so they may not hire the MA
Yeah.
initially. But in an employment position like that, that actually is something that helps the physician, the person signing the contract, to say that, okay, at least I know the employer will make reasonable efforts to try to make sure my life is not terrible and that
Yeah.
I do have the resources to do my job adequately.
Okay. So you get the resources to do your job. Have you seen or have you asked for anything that somebody would say is kind of out of the ordinary?
Not full yes and no. So I ultrasound. So as a family physician, I do a lot of injections, joint injections. I see a lot of skin conditions, masses, things like that. So a portable ultrasound would be very nice, convenient. It would really help the patient, but it's costly. And so I've asked both employers, my last one and my current one, and they don't want to supply that because they have to think on the back end, like how much is this going to bring in revenue, right? They're spending $1,000, $2,000 on this ultrasound.
Hmm.
What is it? How are they going to build a patient to get some of that cost back?
Yeah.
And so both employers did not feel like it was necessary. So I personally can go out and buy my own ultrasound and use it, but the employer will not supply that. So that's an example.
Can you use
But
that
we're,
as a tax write-off?
no, because in our contract we also have money for what we call CME, continuing medical education. So that is an annual amount that we can use towards books, conferences, as well as equipment
Wow.
that is out of the norm or out of what the employer wants to
Okay.
offer or supply.
Now, I'm going to push it one step further. Reasonable is objective, right? To your point, ultrasound machine could definitely help. Have you ever seen anything absolutely ridiculous where maybe a doctor is like, I need a 60-inch flat screen TV in my office. That way, I am comfortable and I can watch the game while I'm in between patients.
Yeah.
Anything ridiculous like that?
No, I think most of us are pretty reasonable and understand that that is not within reason, right? It usually is. It has to be patient centric, right? So it has to be something that helps the patient. So that TV's not helping the patient, they're not going to cover it.
Okay.
That's
What
easy as
about
that.
what about your health? So, for instance, I have a walking treadmill. I believe I got the walking treadmill idea from you. So, for that walking treadmill, you had it in the hospital with you, right? So, is that considered something that was reasonable, or did you have to go out and bring that in yourself?
I had to go out and get it myself because, again, not helping the patient doesn't affect patient care. That's more on me. So yes,
Gotcha.
I asked both employers. Neither wanted to cover it, and that's okay.
Hey, straight negotiations. You never know unless you ask.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
well, that's definitely very, very interesting. And, just I think that for doctors, it's a little bit different because if you're in a regular corporate office setting, what are the tools of the trade? I need a printer, I need my laptop, I need a pen, I need notepads, I need post-it notes. For y'all, it's a little bit different. You need some pretty extensive things as well as the personnel to sit back and help you. So that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
And I assume that if there's a disagreement, do you come through and you just argue with your manager about it? Or is
There's
it
not an argument. There's a conversation, but yes, there's
conversation?
usually there's usually a back and forth. You're trying to plead your case, saying how this is going to help, maybe make you more efficient, maybe help the patient more. You just got to plead your case and try to um, act almost like an attorney, right? A lawyer, and just try to see if you can get them on your side.
Yeah.
But sometimes it comes down to just finances. Like if they are not able to allocate this amount for you, because if they do it for you, they may have to do it for these other physicians, right? So they have to think up big picture as well, which
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. Back when I was a young lawyer and on my negotiation adventure, I think I used the phrase using negotiations to manipulate. And one of my mentors quickly corrected me, and it was you use your negotiations to persuade.
Uh,
And so you always want to persuade somebody to come over. And I thought that was a very strong way of putting it to where it's like, I'm not manipulating, I'm persuading, I'm convincing, I'm
nice.
showing my side of the case, right?
Right, right.
But now moving in to something that is, I think, one of the most important parts of your contract, other than obviously the salary and the term, but non-competes, right?
Yeah.
Non-competes in the world are there to they're there to protect the original company or corporation or business, right? They don't want you, the worker, to go out and not only share, state secrets, but also take clients with them or go over to the opposing hospital across the street and do your good business over there where they're losing business and losing money. And from a non-compete standpoint, non-competes can be very, very broad and very, very restrictive. And there's instances in which, us as lawyers, we read a non-compete and we're like, that's they would if they brought that to court, they would lose in a heartbeat because it's so overly broad that it's just not gonna. You can't restrict somebody from having a livelihood essentially. So I was reading the non compete in this contract, and it essentially lays out the term period of non competition means the period commencing when doctor commenced employment with corporation and continuing through a period following termination of employment for 24 months. So let's stick with the time period. Is that 2-year period pretty commonplace in the term of a non-compete? Because I would argue, as a lawyer, that that is way overly broad, and that surpasses the reasonable time frame for a non-compete.
Nope, it's usually 12 to 24 months. That is fairly standard. And I don't know if that is standard because physicians don't fight back. And so it's been this way for so long, or what. But yes, that is fairly standard for a non-compete to
Yeah.
last.
Okay. The other thing that stands out, and I'll bring these two back together.
Mhm.
But the term area of non-competition means the geographic area within a 25-mile radius of the facility at which doctor furnished the majority of his or her services during the 20-month periods immediately 24-month period in prior to the termination of doctor's employment. So then they look at the previous 2 years and they say, okay, you worked primarily at this spot, so you cannot work 25-mile radius around said spot.
Right.
Isn't it pretty accurate, or is that again standard?
That is quite standard. And again, 25 miles as far as the crows fly, meaning it's a
Hmm.
direct line to the
Yep.
edge, not by driving.
Okay.
So literally, my last contract lawyer had to pull out a ruler and just make sure that within that circle that my new job was outside of that non-compete. But yes, that's very standard.
Yeah. And I would say that 25-mile radius isn't so overbroad within this contract. If I saw something that was 50 miles, 100 miles, I might say that's a little bit more ridiculous. But then again, that can be a situation in which your location matters. So if I would assume that if you were in New York City or Chicago or
Mhm.
Houston, that might be a little bit different.
Exactly. You got it. And that's where those are things that you would want to negotiate, right? So if
Yeah.
you knew you were working somewhere more rural, you know that the next town over is 20 miles away, like, yeah, that's fine. 25-mile non-compete, okay. But if you were in the middle of the city, Fort Worth, Dallas, 25 miles is a big range. And 25 miles driving is not just 30, 40 minutes. It could be longer because of traffic.
Yep.
Those are all things that you would want to negotiate early on in the contract. But yes, those are all things that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, I think that again with negotiation leverage, you want to find the points that you are okay with and the points that you are not okay with. With every individual is different. So for somebody who maybe have more wanderlusty soul, they might say, you know what, put in 200 miles because after I leave this job, I'm going to move across the country and do it over here. So it doesn't really matter. Or you might have somebody that says, nope, I only want to work. Like my house is right next to the hospital, and so are two other hospitals. I only want to work here. So 25 miles isn't, we need that at 1 mile, right?
Right.
So I definitely think that's super, super interesting. And, obviously you had mentioned it's standard. Have you seen any of your colleagues be negatively impacted by non-competes?
Oh, of course. I mean, there are physicians that end up having to drive 2 hours away to work.
Really?
It's not ideal, but yeah, their non-competes are so big, and then the systems around that area may not be hiring,
Yeah.
and so they really have to then look even further out. So yes, it can make a really big impact. And we're talking about physicians who have 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and there's three of them. So they're leaving their family behind to go get a new job because they need the incomes. So it can be very detrimental
Yeah.
to personal life, family life. And that's why it's really important to consider all those things as you're signing the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually, when you're applying to another job, there's a lot of times in the application process where it'll say, did you have a non-compete in your previous contract? Because the next business wants to know. But
Mhm.
I always take contractual language with a grain of salt. Again, not legal advice, because we always want to put that out there, not medical advice, not legal advice. We're just two
Right.
guys talking about, the information on a podcast. But there's always the ability to do it anyways, as long as you're not breaking the law, to do it anyways and see what happens. Anybody can file a lawsuit for anything, and that's kind of the pain of the legal system is if I want to sue you, I can sue you. Once we get in front of that judge, I better have a damn good reason as to why I'm standing in front of that judge, because the judge may not appreciate a waste of the court's time, right?
Mhm.
But I can still sue you. And that within the non-compete, you could probably still go work for the hospital across the street with a different health system. It's just a matter of one, is your previous employer, are they aware of what you've done? And if they are aware, are they willing to try to enforce that non-compete via a demand letter, getting legal representation, and ultimately filing a lawsuit to enforce the contractual terms?
Exactly. Yep. And so again, things that you need to think about and whether you're willing to risk it or not.
Yeah.
I am not. So, but that's why when I negotiate, I try to negotiate that mileage down as little as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's again super interesting. One of my favorite sayings because when you're reading these things, if they wanted in the contract to say that every Tuesday they want you to wear a purple hat, like they could put that in the contract. And that's the interesting thing about contract law and reading an employment contract like this. But I think the notion is this isn't a contract to work at your local coffee shop. This is a contract to provide life-saving services, Like you are
Mhm.
expected to perform, and the this is a 10-page document on how you're going to do that successfully and how the system is going to support you. But at the same time, as we mentioned, the leverage is primarily with them until you've established yourself enough in your career to then be able to say, no, I'm not okay with this. If you're not going to hire me, I'll go someplace else because my services are that valuable. So, and with that, man, going through the rest of the contract, as most lawyers say, pretty standard. You have confidential information where it's, hey, don't spill the beans on your patients, don't spill the beans on the health system and the proprietary nature of what we do here. You have governing law. For those who don't know, in most contracts, you have a governing law of if we get into a disagreement, we are acknowledging and agreeing that the law of this state is going to dictate what's going on with this contract. So you always want to look at the governing law. Sometimes you might enter into a contract in California and it might say that the governing law is based out of New York. Why? Because New York City is where the company's headquartered. And we can go even more detailed with mediation agreements. And if we have a dispute, how are we going to handle that? How to do amendments, how to terminate appropriately, how to pay the salary. Like these contracts get so detailed and they can be so nuanced to where you're looking at a software agreement that pops up on your laptop and has 130 pages to it. And you're like, I'm not even going to read all this stuff. But I think, you've done the right thing by obviously seeing a lawyer, but also taking the time to read your contract to understand what exactly you're agreeing to.
Yeah, and I just want to plug that, for any medical students or residents or new attendings coming out, there is another part in the contract that we haven't quite discussed yet that you can negotiate and should absolutely be negotiated is your time off, right? So you want to make
Yeah.
sure that the number of days is enough for you to take those mental breaks. You want to make sure that they are allocating enough, what we call CME or continuing medical education funds. So is it enough for you to do the conferences and travel to these places adequately? So those are all things that are negotiable. So not everything that you negotiate necessarily has to be about money and salary, but it may be more of mental health, work-life balance. Instead of the 30 days, maybe try to add on 15 days, so 45 days off instead, or negotiating work hours. There's usually a requirement of 36 to 40 hours. Maybe you can negotiate that down to 32 hours. Everyone's a little different, um, but it all ultimately does affect your day-to-day life, and so you want to make sure that you, one, see as many contracts as you can,
Hmm.
two, talk to a contract lawyer, and three, reach out to your mentors who have seen contracts before, so that you can kind of get an idea. Because when you
Yeah.
first come out of residency, again, like I said, you were just excited to get a job, and you don't want to mess it up. And
Yeah.
so that's where the employers have the upper hand.
Yeah.
And so I'm just hoping that this podcast and this conversation helps those people listening in.
Yeah, it's the old like you don't know what you don't know. And there are many times that when you come out and you're completely green to something and you didn't even know that time off should have been put into a contract. You didn't even know that you need your benefits put into your contract. You just don't know because nobody told you. And so again, like you said, contract lawyers, mentors, other individuals can always help with that.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, great conversation. I think this takes our show to an end here. But yeah, Dr. Long and
Lawyer Nick, we appreciate you guys listening and we hope y'all have a good one. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.